So I'm in a Dungeons & Dragons game as a druid character in a very homebrewed game. My DM has allowed me to have some certain special trinkets and abilities, and one of those specific to the druid is a Micro Griffin. So this allows me to send messages within a 50-mile radius as long as I use a spell slot to whittle and create a little whistle that lets me call Micro Griffin to me. I'm able to tell it who I'm trying to send a message to, and it will deliver the message if it can. So I decided I wanted to make an actual prop of it because I thought it would be really fun. I'd already drawn it before to show the other players what it looks like, but I thought a physical piece to have on the table or even just show people at random was enjoyable. So I'm using some Sculpey clay to make this on an aluminum armature that I made out of aluminum foil and a little bit of masking tape. I generally use my fingers only to do the basic core shape of a lot of sculptures, so I'm just conditioning the clay and getting it to a point where it's nice and soft and malleable, and then pressing my base color, which is going to be red for the majority of it, onto the armature. I decide to not be completely true to my drawing. I had just made a basic concept drawing of what I wanted it to look like without really thinking too much further on that. The DM's input was that it was half cardinal, half fox, so quite red, and when I did the original sketch, I gave it what would be a red fox, so orangey on the bottom, so that's why I don't use red clay all over, but in the end I do end up painting it pretty much completely red. I also decided to give it a little bit more of a fantasy flair compared to the drawing. The drawing's more of a literal translation of a cardinal head, where when I do the sculpture I decide that I want to make these cool different feathers on top of the head that look quite different. So it is still, based on a cardinal, it's just that I decide to give it a fantasy flair. Here I am using silicone sculpting tools. I use these all the time. They're great for pretty much any sculpting material I've used so far, which includes Milliput, green stuff, Sculpey. I haven't used it on epoxy sculpt yet, but I hope to be doing that fairly soon. They each just have different tipped edges, so some of them are cone shaped, some of them are angular. I'm putting dents in to make it look kind of like feathers on the edge of the cheeks. Cardinals have chubby cheeks. I decided to give it an ear because, again, it's a fantasy creature that's partially based on a fox as well. Obviously, a bird wouldn't have a little ear like this. And I do hold the armature up to the drawing several times because the drawing I felt was actually the size I would imagine it to be in real life. The whole point is that it's a small creature that's not easily noticed that carries the message. So I liked that it would fit in the palm of your hand, and I felt that going by the drawing was an easy way to make sure that I kept to what my original concept was. I just used a ball tool right there, a metal ball tool, to press in where the eyes will go. And again, pressing in more feather detail. Here I am sculpting the beak. This was a bit tricky. Cardinals have very particular shaped beaks, and again, I did want it to clearly look like a cardinal besides just the colors, so I attempted to look at several reference images and my photo and make it look correct. I also go through several stages of baking this piece, so I've actually baked it once already at this point, just the red bits that are done, because it makes it a lot easier when you're handling it and adding more pieces to be able to hold it wherever you want without worrying about squishing or deforming parts you've already finished earlier. So that's why I'm able to hold the red area without worrying and really press that beak on well. It was a little bit longer up the face than I had wanted, so I ended up using the sculpting tool to just texture the base of the orange clay and make it look more like feathers, and I ended up painting it red later so that it's just a feathery transition into the beak. So this is Sculpted Bacon Bond. I'm just using that to sort of glue the eyes in a sense. Once it's baked, it hardens, and it's a really good way to secure clay. I did this because the red clay underneath was already baked once, and frequently when you try to put fresh clay on top of already baked clay, it has a little bit of a difficult time sticking. See right there, with trying to put the bottom piece of the eye outline on, it wasn't quite sticking, so I had to try twice to get it on there. Sometimes you can just keep pressing at it and it'll stick fine, and I do that sometimes, but certain things I just use the Sculpted Bacon Bond because it's a quick solution. And as I mentioned earlier, I wasn't totally set on the colors I was going to do yet, so I was still kind of going along with my drawing at this point. So I use a gray clay. This is just Sculpey one, and I'm adding it to the bottom to make the fox half. It did kind of help me think about it in a different way as well, to have it as the two colors, because it reminded me that this part was going to be more like hair and more foxy. Checking the size again. Here I'm using a rubber tip dental tool to make little scratch lines for hair. I start at the very top where the transition from feathered body to furred body will be, and then I do the legs because there's no point in trying to put in all the hair detail when you're still putting on body part that will be hair textured later. I use these two balls, one on either side, for the approximate size of the thighs, and I'm just pressing them flat now, making sure that they're equal on both sides, and softening the edges and trying to make them look like they're actually part of the body and not just two discs on either side. Adding the tail. The tail was actually pretty fun, and I had a good time texturing it. I thought it would be really hard to make it look fluffy and flowy, but it came out pretty good in the end. I'm just rolling out some clay worms to make for feet, making sure they're the same size, and then just pressing them on the bottom. I'm also trying to press it down on the mat to make sure that it's got a flat bottom, so it'll hopefully sit well when it's done. I didn't film this very well, so apologies for that, but I've just sculpted the toes on the end of the feet. So this is kind of like a wire brush tool. It comes in a lot of different sculpting kits, so you can just get it in a kit together. I don't know what its individual name is. It might actually just be metal wire brush tool, but I use this to make the fur texture. It works really, really well. The only thing is that it does kind of make the clay pill, which is where it has the little balls that get kind of stuck on the outside and makes it look rough and not like fur. But if you use alcohol, which is what I'm doing right here, I've dipped my paintbrush in some rubbing alcohol and just lightly rub it all over the top of the clay. It will get rid of those little pills either by knocking them off or sort of melting them, actually, and that makes it have a smoother texture without losing the texture. You can see the tail came out pretty good. I just dug really deep with that metal wire brush tool, and then I added some little worms of clay and kept using the brush over it several times until it looked like fluffy hair. At this point, I've baked it again, which is why the eyes unfortunately have now turned black because I accidentally left it in the oven a little bit too long. So they burnt a little bit, but it's not a big deal because they're just eyes that are inset and protected by the clay. Here I am using E6000 glue, which is a jewelry glue, to glue some wires for a basic armature for the front legs. Once I let that glue dry, I'm moving on and I'm doing the clay for the legs. Just using my silicone tool to really press it in there. Adjusting it to make sure that it's in the right direction and checking that it still sits flat. I don't use the Sculpted Bacon Bond for this because it's a large enough piece and it's on an armature that's glued in, and I'm able to press it really well all around the piece, so I didn't bother to use it in this instance. I just honestly play it by ear when I'm going to use it. Like you can see, I'm using it now for the lower bits. That's because these pieces are going to be much thinner, and I was worried about them hanging onto just a piece of wire. I knew I wouldn't be able to really press it onto anything else. It is quite goopy as well, and it can end up getting on your fingers or getting rubbed off, so you have to really decide when you want to use it. Again, using my dental tool to press in some details. Making a couple toes off the end of the foot, and I decide that it's going to have bird feet in the front and it has fox feet in the back. And I just made some more little worms of clay to do the toes, and I add on, because it's wet clay touching wet clay and it's a very small piece, I do not use the Bacon Bond, I just press it on. I think I could have done a lot better with the toes, but it was my first time actually making bird feet. I think they came out alright for that. Adding little details to the toes and feet. Claws can be quite tricky, and I didn't want them to break off, so I tried to make them fatter than they probably really would be. Adding some texture to the legs. Birds have quite scaly legs, so I was trying to give it a somewhat scaled look. Using a dotting tool, same thing, just trying to go with the scale appearance. And I just do the same thing on the other side to make the other foot. And I'm adding more feather texture. At one point, I felt like I was almost finished, but I didn't like how smooth the bird half looked, so I ended up deciding that I would make feathers all over it, even though I had already finished what I thought was going to be my last bake. And sometimes that happens when you make sculptures. You realize that it doesn't quite look how you want, and you just have to add more to it. Detail goes a long way, especially if it's something that you're going to paint later. It might not look great when it's unpainted, and you decide to add more textures instead, but once you add that paint, it looks amazing. It shows all the effort that you put into every little dent and crevice and crease. Here I'm preparing to make the wings, so I decided I was going to make a aluminum foil armature. I haven't made a ton of wings in sculpture pieces, and when I have, I've generally done completely different things with them. Angelina foil, shrunk wrap on wires, larger stuff, paper mache, that kind of stuff. So I can't think of any that I've really done wings, especially bird wings, in Sculpey. So this was a bit of an experiment for me, but I used the aluminum foil. I put wires in it so that I can easily just stick it right into the sculpture and glue it into place, so I have the positioning in a solid way, nice and secure. And then I used masking tape to make it real tight. And then I just wrapped a thin piece of the red Sculpey around the whole outside of the wings. I didn't actually get all the way on the back of them, but it doesn't matter because you can't see them since it's pressing against the Micro Griffin's body. So I'm just using my different tools, the silicone tips, to press in feathers. I used several reference photos of cardinals to try and do the wings so that they'd look at least like real bird wings, preferably like cardinal wings. It was pretty hard. I think if I were to do it again, I would do it in a different way. I'd probably actually make individual feathers and put them onto the solid base. I used Sculpey Bacon Bond to coat the pin and then to glue the two wings together on the back and fully position them. And I have now baked it again. This was the point where I thought maybe I would be done, and then I was like, no, it needs feathers because it looks too smooth, I don't like it. So again, because Sculpey, you can just keep on baking it if you want, I decided that I can in fact do this, and I can make it really feathery, and it came out way better, so much better. So I'm just making little balls of Sculpey and then just using my tool and really texturing them like crazy. I decided the feathers up on the body would be more round and lobed, and the ones down on the leg are a bit pointier. They kind of look a little bit like leaves, but again, it's a fantasy creature, it's fine. So I've baked it for the last time now that I've got all my extra feathers on, and I'm now moving on to painting. I have mentioned this in my other video and will always mention this. This is just cheap acrylic paints I buy at the dollar store. It's nothing fancy. I just don't see a point in getting really fancy paint for little fun sculptures for myself. I decided that I am going to do the entire thing red around this point. I'm thinking about it, and later I decide I will in fact make the whole thing red. So I kind of paint in stages where I start at the top, and then I'm just like, yep, just gonna go for it. So I have painted red around the beak where I mentioned before that I was just doing the texture because the orange clay was a little bit too big. So since I textured it like feathers, I was able to paint it red, and with enough coats it just matched the rest of it and no one ever knows. And then I end up painting it black anyway, but whatever. Here I am adding the black details, and again you can see I haven't actually painted the bottom red yet. I'm just trying to make sure that the face definitely looks like a cardinal. Colors do so much to make things look like what you want. It's crazy. Sometimes I make a sculpture and it's all gray or green or whatever random color of clay that I've chosen to use, and I'm like, oh, this isn't gonna look good, and then I go to paint it and it just, everything comes right out and it looks awesome. Here it is. So yeah, I've now committed and decided that this will in fact be a red creature. I actually hadn't 100% made up my mind on how I was going to do the wings yet, so you'll see I kind of avoid those a little bit. Just getting the tail here. And the red matched the red clay pretty well, so it is a slightly different color, but it was close enough that it didn't make a big difference. I did at least 2 coats of red. It makes it all look quite uniform. I did decide it would have a white belly because foxes have white bellies, and I think white bellies are cute, so I decided to do that. Little black feet. Black feet look good because it matches the face. Here I'm doing, it's a black wash, so I've basically done 50% water, 50% black acrylic paint, and it's really watered down. You put it on for a second, it soaks into all of the little cracks, crevices, and details that you've done, and then you can just wipe off the top coat. Sometimes if I'm doing something that I want to look quite dirty, I'll actually leave it on longer, and I might even use just the brush to pull off some of the excess, and it gives it like a grungy look, but it also does the same shading effect and detail popping effect. With this, I didn't want it to look really dirty, so I put the wash on and then I used the paper towel to pull off the excess and make it still look lighter. And I'm just covering the whole thing in this black wash. Here I am doing the eye. I decided that I wanted it to have a red eye. Foxes have eyes that generally kind of match that orangey red of their fur, so I decided that I wanted it to look the same. This is Color Shift acrylic paint. This stuff is super fun. It's a flash red color. It's not quite red. It kind of looks a little purpley to me, but I thought it would be cool that it's a magical creature that flies and delivers messages, so it should have really sparkly, cool wings. And I decided that the eyes would look cool to have the same paint color. Here I am adding UV resin to the eye. I think on sculptures, even on my minis, I add resin to the eyes. It just makes them look way more alive and real. And here's my finished product. Looks pretty cool, I think. Certainly a good little message deliverer. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. If you want to see more and liked what I've done here, please like and hit that subscribe and notification bell.